Imagine a species capable of mapping the surface of Mars before fully understanding the terrain of its own soul. We engineer spacecraft to reach Saturn's rings, yet struggle to reach the quiet corners of our own inner landscape. In a world defined by gigabytes and light-speed communication, we remain ironically somewhat illiterate when it comes to the deeper, non-material data of our existence. How is it possible that in this age of instant access, the most essential record of who you are, who you've been, and who you could become remains hidden from plain sight? This is not science fiction, nor is it fantasy. It's a question rooted in the very nature of consciousness, memory, and time. A question that echoes across philosophies, faiths, and the growing edges of quantum theory. What if everything you've ever thought, felt, dreamed, or done, everything every human has ever experienced, is still somewhere encoded in the fabric of the universe? We call it the Akashic Records. Now, before you dismiss this as mysticism or metaphysical folklore, consider this. We already live in a universe where the past leaves a trace. The cosmic microwave background radiation is a 13.8 billion-year-old whisper from the Big Bang, still echoing across the cosmos. Black holes encode the information of everything they consume along the event horizon of the strangest principles of theoretical physics. And DNA, that double helix blueprint inside you, is a biological archive transcribing your ancestry like a multi-dimensional script that stretches backward into deep time. So what if consciousness, too, leaves a trace? What if every decision, every intention, every moment of clarity or confusion is not lost, but stored embedded in a field beyond space and time? A field, not unlike gravity or electromagnetism, subtle yet omnipresent, invisible but real. In Sanskrit, the term for this invisible medium is Akasha. And from this term arises the concept of the Akashic Records, a hypothetical energetic database that records the totality of all that is. Not as parchment, not as scrolls, but as vibrational memory, a quantum ledger of human thought and spirit. Now, let's be clear. This isn't something we've confirmed with telescopes or particle accelerators, but that doesn't mean it doesn't deserve our attention. After all, many of our most profound discoveries began not with proof, but with imagination. The atom, the theory of relativity, the multiverse. Before they were validated, they were considered wild ideas. And perhaps that's the role the Akashic Records play now? A provocative hypothesis at the intersection of soul and science. Let's entertain the idea for a moment, not as believers or skeptics, but as cosmic citizens. Think of the Akashic Records as a kind of universal server, a database that doesn't just log the material like the trajectory of planets or the decay rate of neutrons, but the immaterial. Your intentions, your lessons, your regrets, your joys. A place where every soul's trajectory is archived like stardust preserved in the structure of a comet. It's not unlike the principle behind cloud computing. Your photos, emails, and files are stored not inside your phone, but in invisible data centers spread across the globe. They're always accessible, though not always obvious. Similarly, the Akashic Records are said to be accessible not through a device, but through consciousness. Not by typing in a password, but by entering a particular state of mental clarity and spiritual readiness. This raises a larger question. If we had access to a deeper, fuller view of our own time linear, past actions, our present patterns, our possible futures, what would we do with that information? Would we use it to heal, to evolve, to understand the why behind the what? That's the power of this idea, not in whether the records exist in literal form, but in the way they challenge our assumptions about memory, morality, and meaning. Because if your life is being recorded, not for judgment, but for reflection, then every moment carries significance. Every decision, weight, every act, an echo in eternity. And here's where things get really interesting. Many ancient cultures, long before the advent of the written word, believed in something remarkably similar. The Egyptians spoke of the Hall of Records. The Hebrews called it the Book of Life. Tibetan monks, Hindu sages, Greek philosophers each described in their own way an omniscient field where all actions and intentions are preserved. Now, we don't claim this is empirically verifiable, but we shouldn't be too quick to discard the intuitions of entire civilizations simply because they didn't have our modern tools. After all, wisdom isn't bound by chronology. Helena Blavatsky, one of the 19th century's most polarizing thinkers, introduced the term Akashic Records to the Western world. She didn't invent the ideas, he translated it, from Tibetan mystics and Eastern philosophies into a language modern seekers could begin to understand. Decades later, Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, claimed to access these records in a trance state, offering life readings and health diagnoses that baffled skeptics and inspired thousands. Were these the hallucinations of a mystic, or were they early experiments in tuning into a frequency that science has not yet caught up to? We know that quantum particles behave differently when observed. We know that entanglement allows particles to communicate instantaneously across space. We know that consciousness influences outcome in double-slit experiments. And we know that memories can outlast lifetimes in phenomena we barely understand, like déjà vu, ancestral trauma, or inexplicable personal transformations. So what if the Akashic Records are less like a book and more like a field where memory, intention, and potentiality converge? A cosmic hard drive, continuously recording, endlessly accessible. If so, then your soul isn't just traveling through time. It's authoring a manuscript that can be revised, revisited, and reread if only you have the courage to open the next page. Let's stretch our imagination a little further. Think of the Akashic Records as a gravitational field of memory, bending the trajectory of your awareness the way gravity bends starlight. It doesn't simply archive what you've done, it warps how you understand what you are. Just as gravity is not visible, yet exerts its influence on every object in the universe, the Akashic field may influence your intuition, your déjà vu, your uncanny sense of having been somewhere or someone before. Now, why should this matter? Because humanity is undergoing an identity crisis on a planetary scale. We've decoded the human genome, but haven't decoded the human story. We've created artificial intelligence that can write poetry, but we've lost touch with the inner voice that narrates our own lives. We've made knowledge widely accessible, but somehow meaning has grown more elusive. And maybe that's the true promise of the Akashic idea, not as an escape into the mystical, but as a return to significance. In a world that constantly tells you you're just one of billions, the Akashic perspective reminds you that every moment matters, that your existence is not incidental, that you are not a glitch in a cosmic machine, you are a conscious filament in a network of universal intelligence with a signature that is uniquely yours. So what would it mean to gain access to this record? Not metaphorically, literally. What would you learn if you could replay your soul's highlights reel, not just this life, but lifetimes past and future threads you have yet to walk? Would you discover unfinished business? Would you witness the origins of a fear you've never understood? Would you find echoes of people you've known for only moments, yet somehow always remembered? Many who claim to access these records describe visions, feelings, symbols. Some experience entire scenes unfold, as if watching a movie of themselves through another Lensa third-person view of their first-person life. But what matters most is not how these records are accessed. What matters is how we interpret the data. We've all heard the saying, history repeats itself. But maybe it doesn't. Maybe we just don't learn. The Akashic Records, if they exist, don't repeat history. They record its patterns, patiently waiting for us to recognize them and change course. Because information alone is not transformation. Awareness is the catalyst. And this is where the ancient meets the modern. For just as mystics spoke of accessing the book of life, our modern tools have given us their own versions. The cloud, the blockchain, neural networks that mirror the human brain, search engines that predict your question before you type. Data isn't just stored, no, it's alive. It learns you. It adapts to you. What if the Akashic field does the same? What if it doesn't just store information, but reflects it back intelligently to help you evolve? Let's consider the physics for a moment. The universe is fundamentally information-rich. The late physicist John Archibald Wheeler proposed the concept it from bit, that every physical thing is at bottom a manifestation of information. Quantum physics, after all, teaches us that observation collapses possibility into outcome, that consciousness somehow matters. And if consciousness is part of the equation, perhaps memory is too. The Akashic Records, in that light, could be a universal feedback loop-pan archive, not just of what has been, but a mirror for what might become. And in that mirror, we are invited not to judge, but to understand. Not to fear what we find, but to integrate it. You see, we humans tend to think in linear time. Past behind us, present now, future up ahead. But the universe doesn't operate on a timeline. It works in fields, in waves, in overlapping probabilities. In that model, your past, present, and future are not isolated files in a cosmic filing cabinet. They are interconnected frequencies resonating, colliding, influencing one another in real time. When you feel drawn to something or someone without explanation, when you know something you've never learned, when you heal from something simply by understanding its root, these are not anomalies. They may be echoes from a larger field, reverberations from your own Akashic narrative. So now the question becomes, how do you tune in? Access doesn't come through ritual alone. It begins with intent. Clear, focused, honest inquiry. Not the kind of curiosity that seeks entertainment, but the kind that hungers for truth. That's the kind of signal the records respond to. And as the mystics have said for centuries, the door doesn't swing open from the outside, it opens inward. You become the access point, the password, the portal. And when you enter, you may find that the answers don't arrive in language, but in resonance. Not in paragraphs, but in patterns. Not in voices from beyond, but insights from within. It is said that those who learn to read their Akashic records often feel as though they are remembering something they already knew. That's because these aren't external facts being downloaded, they are internal truths being awakened. The Akashic field, in this view, is less like a divine surveillance system and more like a cosmic MRI revealing not who you pretend to be, but who you are beneath the layers. And here's where responsibility comes in. Because once you access this kind of knowing, you can no longer pretend you didn't know. You can't unsee your patterns. You can't unknow your purpose. And you can't undo the truth that consciousness, yours and Minus, an active force in shaping the reality we inhabit. That, perhaps, is the most empowering part of the Akashic paradigm. You are not just a subject of history. You are a co-author. And this living, breathing memory of all that you are updates itself with every thought you think, every choice you make, every act of kindness or cruelty or courage. The pen is in your hand. The page is infinite. The story is not over. If the Akashic records are real not merely as an idea, but as a layer of reality woven into the fabric of the cosmos, then what does that imply about identity? Not your name, not your job, not your nationality, but the deeper identity, the one that doesn't expire when your physical body returns to dust, the one that doesn't get updated on a driver's license, but is constantly updated in the architecture of your soul. Let's explore that. When a supernova explodes, it sends debris, carbon, oxygen, ion scattering across galaxies. Those very elements go on to form planets and eventually life. In other words, the death of a star is the beginning of a story elsewhere. And so it is with you. The version of you that once existed 5 years ago, 5 lifetimes ago, has left behind fragments, lessons, imprints. The Akashic records, in this analogy, are the cosmic archive of those explosions and regenerations. The stored signature of every transformation you've undergone and every form you've taken. They remember the times you burned bright with courage and the times you collapsed under your own gravity. They remember you not just as a single lifetime, but as a continuum of consciousness. And this brings us to an unsettling, yet liberating possibility. Your first time experiencing something in this life may not actually be your first time at all. That phobia that makes no rational sense, that unexplainable skill you picked up without formal training, that strange familiarity you feel with a stranger you just met, these may be echoes, not coincidences. Reminders of a page from your soul's biography. Some call this past life memory. Others call it genetic memory or archetypal inheritance. But whatever label you use, the Akashic lens reframes it all not as superstition, but as recurrence. Now, here's where science begins to circle this mystery, like a satellite in orbit. We know that trauma can be passed through generations epigenetically encoded in the chemical markers that regulate our DNA. We know that children born to survivors of war or famine often inherit elevated stress responses, despite never experiencing the trauma themselves. So what else are we inheriting that we haven't yet measured? Could there be another kind of inheritance, one that's not stored in flesh or molecule but in field? The Akashic Records may not be read in the way we read a textbook, but felt, intuited, sensed like gravitational waves, subtle but undeniable. They might arrive as intuition or dreams or synchronicity or moments of piercing insight that collapse years of confusion into a single soul-level realization. In a Newtonian world, this sounds far-fetched, but in a quantum one, it's entirely on the table. Because the universe doesn't behave like a machine. It behaves like a network of possibilities. And you are one of those possibilities becoming aware of itself. So what do you do with that? First, you stop asking whether you're allowed to access the Akashic Records. You already are. This isn't a members-only club. It's not reserved for monks in caves or gurus on mountaintops. If the records exist, they are open to every consciousness that seeks not with greed or pride, but with humility and readiness. But access requires alignment. Imagine trying to pick up a radio signal. If your frequency is off even by a little, all you get is static. The Akashic field works the same way. You don't storm the gates, you tune in. And tuning in starts with the question behind your question. Not what was I in a past life, but what pattern is repeating in me and why? Not when will I meet my soulmate, but what in me must evolve so I stop mistaking comfort for love? Not why did this happen to me, but what is this trying to teach me? These aren't questions you can Google. They require reflection, presence, silence. The Akashic Records don't speak louder than your distractions, they speak beneath them. And when they do, it's not with blame, it's with pattern recognition. Think of them as a teacher that doesn't grade your test, but hands it back to you with the patterns highlighted. Look here. You've done this before. You've chosen this kind of relationship before. You've run from this kind of fear before. Will you continue? And now we touch the core of personal power. Because if you are being recorded not by the heavens above, but by the nature of consciousness itself, then your responsibility is no longer to escape the past, but to transcend it. Not to resent your history, but to reframe it. Not to rewrite the records, but to write the future with greater awareness. That's where transformation happens. Not in denial, but in understanding. And let's not forget, the Akashic Records aren't only about you, they are about us. They are said to contain the whole human story, our rises and falls, our civilizations and collapses, our truths and our illusions. They hold the wisdom lost in fires, floods, and forgetting. The knowledge once housed in temples, scrolls, and songs that no longer echo across the valleys they were sung in. Imagine, then, what becomes possible if enough people access not only personal records, but the collective one. What if a scientist dreams up a breakthrough, not because it's new, but because it's remembered? What if a child paints a symbol they've never seen, but once knew in a life lost to history? What if an ancient technology re-emerges, not by invention, but by reconnection? The Akashic Records may be less about unlocking secrets and more about recovering what we've buried beneath the noise of civilization. And the moment we begin listening, not just for information, but for understanding, is the moment we begin returning to our cosmic heritage, not with arrogance, but with awe. Not as masters of the universe, but as students of its memory. In the tapestry of human exploration, we often celebrate the visible, the mapped, the measured, the photographed. We build telescopes to peer across time, decode genomes to understand lineage, launch rovers to scrape Martian dust. But there's a quieter frontier, one not bound by distance, but by depth. And some explorers have dared to go there not with rockets or equations, but with consciousness. One such explorer was Edgar Cayce, a man often dismissed by the scientific community, yet revered by countless seekers around the world. Born in the late 1800s, KC was known as the sleeping prophet. Why? Because his insights came not from study or experimentation, but from a state of self-induced trance. In that altered state, KC claimed to access a realm of universal knowledge, what he identified as the Akashic Records. He could diagnose illnesses of people he'd never met, offer remedies, describe past lives, all without being awake in the conventional sense. Thousands of these sessions were transcribed, logged, archived. Were they all accurate? Not entirely. But even NASA missions occasionally missed their mark. The real question isn't whether Casey was right about every detail. The question is, how did he access what he couldn't possibly know? And he wasn't alone. Dolores Cannon, a name more familiar to the modern era, pioneered a method of deep hypnosis known as quantum healing hypnosis technique, or QHHT. Through it, she guided individuals beyond memory and ego into the terrain of the soul. What she discovered was astonishing. Her subjects, under hypnosis, described not only vivid past lives, but journeys into dimensions without names, encounters with intelligences beyond human description, and, most consistently, access to what they called a cosmic library. Each person seemed to encounter this library in a form suited to their psychosome, as rows of books, others as light, as sound, as an intuitive knowing, and always the library contained knowledge beyond the present self. Now, let's pause. As a scientist, I don't suggest we accept these claims blindly. We must question, probe, analyze. But as humans, we must also recognize that the most radical ideas are often the ones that first sound impossible. Remember, at one point, people laughed at the idea of invisible forces holding planets in orbit. Gravity was once mysticism. So what if consciousness is more than the byproduct of a firing brain? What if, as increasing studies in quantum cognition suggest, the brain is more receiver than generator? What if memory is non-local accessible not just from within, but through a shared energetic field? If that's true, then accessing the Akashic Records may be less like unlocking a door and more like tuning a neural antenna. And practices like deep meditation, hypnosis, and guided regression may simply quiet the noise enough for the signal to get through. And here's where it becomes truly practical. Because accessing this field isn't about curiosity for curiosity's sake. It's not about proving a past life or finding your Atlantean origin story. It's about healing. In one session, Dolores Cannon helped a woman resolve chronic illness by uncovering its roots in trauma not from this life, but from a previous incarnation. Whether that narrative was literal or symbolic doesn't matter. What mattered was that the woman healed, pain vanished, patterns broke, the story gave meaning, and meaning gave liberation. You see, the brain is not a hard drive. It doesn't operate in binary. It's a storytelling machine. And sometimes a story, if it lands in the right emotional center, can alter not just belief, but biology. This is where science and soul begin to intersect. Because what we dismiss as anecdotal in science is often what's most transformative in experience. And if accessing the Akashic Records allows a person to break a cycle, shed a burden, forgive a wound, they are not escaping reality. They are participating in its reconstruction. Let's zoom out across cultures and eras. We've always had names for this field. The Egyptians called it the Hall of Ma'at. The Greeks hinted at it through the anima mundi, world soul. The Sufis spoke of the preserved tablet. The Hebrews called it the Sefer HaChaim, the Book of Life. Different metaphors, same principle, a universal archive of soul-based data. Even in Christianity, Revelation speaks of the book in which all is written. The metaphors vary, but the intuition persists. Our lives are not isolated events. They are part of an ongoing record, a living story. One we are writing together. So what now? We're no longer a species confined by distance. We communicate across oceans instantly. We simulate entire worlds inside virtual headsets. We split the atom and map the stars. But what about the unexplored dimension within? What about the patterns we repeat without knowing why? What about the relationships that mirror old wounds? What about the goals we chase that feel hollow once achieved? The Akashic Records don't promise escape. They promise understanding. And understanding is the precursor to freedom. To explore your records isn't to live in the past. It's to redeem it. It's to locate the root of a behavior, belief, or blockage and reframe it not as failure, but as information. And this reframing isn't limited to trauma. It includes your gifts, your joys, your innate callings, the things that make no logical sense, yet feel like destiny, the poet who never studied poetry, the child prodigy who plays Bach without being taught, the healer who instinctively knows what the body needs. These aren't mysteries, they are memories surfacing. The Akashic Records, in this light, are not just a book of the past. They are a map of possibility and interactive atlas of who you've been, who you are, and who you could become. To access them is to say, I'm ready not only to know myself, but to remember myself. And that, dear listener, may be the most powerful act of science and spirituality combined, not to measure something new, but to remember what has always been. So now we arrive at the inevitable question, how do you access it? This grand ethereal library, this quantum archive of soul, experienced the so-called Akashic Records. If it exists, and if every human being is a contributor to it, is there a way to open the file folder of your own cosmic data? Let's dispense with the illusions first. There's no password, no door, no gatekeeper in white robes holding a checklist, and no barcode scanner waiting to pull up your karmic resume. If the Akashic Records exist, they do not reside in a place. They reside in a state of consciousness, a quality of attention, a precision of intention. You don't reach them by traveling outward, you reach them by turning inward, with focus sharp enough to split atoms of thought and humility deep enough to kneel before the mystery of yourself. Let's return to science for a moment. The act of observation, as described in quantum mechanics, alters the observed. The observer and the observed are in a kind of dance unavoidably entangled. So it follows, if you begin to observe your own consciousness deeply, curiously, without filters then, you may begin to access levels of reality that remain hidden from casual awareness. This is where the Akashic field may live, in the domain of profound observation. To access it, you don't need to become a monk. You don't need to abandon your life. What you do need is clarity of purpose. Not vague curiosity, but a laser-like question forged in the crucible of your soul. Because this field, this record, doesn't respond to idle minds, it responds to aligned minds. So the first step is intention. Clear, unapologetic, emotionally honest intention. Not what you think you should ask, but what you ache to know. Are you seeking insight into a recurring life pattern? Trying to understand the deeper root of your anxiety? Curious why you're drawn to certain people or repelled by others? Wondering what your purpose is, not the job title, but the soul curriculum? These are the questions that start the signal. And once the signal is out, the tuning begins. Which brings us to method. Some enter the records through meditation, others through hypnosis, some through guided visualization or breath work or prayer. But the truth is, the method is less important than the mental posture you bring to it. The posture of openness, stillness, receptivity. Think of your consciousness like a radio dial. Most days, we're tuned to the static of the everyday appointments, tasks, social media, distractions. But when you slow your frequency, when you align your breath, your brain waves, your being, you begin to detect something more subtle. A whisper, a pattern, a feeling that what's arising is not just coming from you, but through you. At that point, you don't need to believe in Akashic Records as doctrine. You begin to experience them as resonance. Information may come in many forms. Symbols, colors, emotions, sudden insights. Sometimes entire scenes may unfold. You may remember something you never lived yet, feel like you've known it forever. Other times, the message may be simple. A word, a name, a direction. And here's the paradox. The more you try to control it, the less access you'll have. The records don't respond to force, they respond to surrender. And with that surrender comes the next challenge. discernment. Because not everything that rises from your subconscious is sacred. Not every image is prophetic. Just as not every thought you think is wise, not every vision you receive is truth. The Akashic field is precise, but your personal filters are not. So your work, as a conscious participant, is to question gently, interpret wisely, and integrate responsibly. This brings us to another essential principle: ethical access. Let's say you could read someone else's records, their traumas, their past lives, their contracts. Would you? Should you? The answer must be a resounding nounless invited, unless guided by consent and compassion. This is not a psychic game. The Akashic field is not entertainment. It is sacred terrain. The library doesn't open its shelves to satisfy gossip. It opens to heal, to teach, to guide. So before you open the records, ask yourself, am I ready to act on what I find? Because insight without action is just spiritual tourism. The records may reveal an old pattern, but it's your responsibility to break it. They may show you a gift, but you must still choose to develop it. They may introduce you to your soul's contract, but only you can fulfill it. And here lies the deeper beauty of this entire idea. Whether the records are literal or metaphorical, energetic or archetypal, the act of seeking them sharpens you, refines you. It changes the way you walk through the world. You begin to see patterns instead of problems. You begin to see people not as accidents, but as ecosystem returning to teach you, others to mirror you, a few to awaken you. And you begin to live as if you are being remembered, not just watched. Because maybe that's what the Akashic Records really are: not surveillance from above, but an invitation from within. An invitation to stop living on autopilot, to stop recycling stories that no longer fit, to stop asking the world for direction and start asking your own soul. And when you do, you find something strange happens. Your reality shifts. The same job begins to feel different. The same relationship now offers new meaning. Even the pain begins to teach instead of torment. Why? Because you're no longer just reacting to life, you're remembering your place in it. Not as a victim, not even as a hero, but as a participant in a far vaster, deeper, interconnected story. A story you are writing even as it's being recorded. So far, we've spoken of the Akashic Records as a personal portala mirror for the soul, a feedback system of memory and intention. But what if we widen the lens? What if we consider not just your records or mine, but ours? Because just as an individual holds a unique energetic signature, so too does a civilization, a family, a culture, a species. If the Akashic field records all thought, all intention, all experience, then it doesn't merely store biographies, it preserves epochs, whole civilizations, moments of collective brilliance, and moments of catastrophic forgetting. Think of ancient Alexandria, a beacon of learning, home to the greatest library the world had known burned to ash. Think of indigenous cultures whose oral histories, languages, and cosmologies were erased by colonization. Think of entire systems of medicine, geometry, astronomy, and ethics, lost not because they were wrong, but because they were inconvenient to empires. But lost does not mean gone. Because while paper burns, patterns endure. Ideas leave imprints. Wisdom has gravity. And what if, just what if, the Akashic field holds those lost blueprints still? What if the knowledge we call cutting edge is sometimes nothing more than recovered memory? Take architecture, for instance. How did ancient peoples align megaliths with solstices and celestial bodies with uncanny precision long before the telescope? Were they guessing or remembering? Or healing? How did ancient shamans, without labs or microscopes, understand plants' interactions with the human body so well that we're still rediscovering their methods today? And philosophy. How did sages speak of reincarnation, multidimensional reality, and the illusion of time centuries before relativity, quantum mechanics, and neuroscience caught up? Maybe they weren't speculating, maybe they were listening, tuning into a field, accessing records that never belonged to them alone, but to the entire human story. This brings us to an extraordinary implication. If the Akashic Records hold collective memory, then They are not just a library of what has been, they are a laboratory of what could be. They hold forgotten technologies, abandoned ethics, alternative paths humanity might have taken and might still take again. Think of it like a spiritual archive of version history's not, unlike how a computer saves old drafts of a file. Somewhere in this quantum archive might be a version of humanity that chose harmony over dominance, creativity over consumption, conscious evolution over competition. And here's the most empowering part. We are not locked out of these versions. The Akashic paradigm suggests that potential futures are not dictated, they are co-authored. And that means our access to the records isn't just about healing the past, it's about seeding the future. But only if we're willing to ask better questions. Not, how do I get more? But how do we remember enough to live wisely? Not, what can I manifest? But what am I here to repair, to reveal, to remind? These are not small questions. They require courage, because to ask them is to acknowledge a truth we spend much of modern life avoiding, that we are responsible for what we remember, and perhaps more importantly, for what we choose to forget. Forget that we are connected, that the breath of one affects the balance of many. Forget that actions ripple across generations, not just lifetimes. Forget that the earth is not property, but partner. The Akashic Records are not just an archive of these truths, they are a mirror we hold up to see whether we're living in alignment with them. And if we're not, then the mirror reflects not blame, but choice. Because the field is not static, it is dynamic. It evolves with us. Every time a person forgives, a line in the record updates. Every time a truth is spoken, a distortion untangles. Every time a cycle is broken, whether in a family, a city, or a species, the entire library expands. This is not New Age poetry. This is systems theory at a cosmic scale, a feedback loop of cause and consciousness. And this is why the Akashic Records, if real, may be the most important untapped tool in our evolution, because humanity is at a crossroads. Not for the first time, but perhaps for the last time at this level of consequence. We face crises of ecology, empathy, economics. And if their root is not a lack of technology, it's a lack of memory. We have forgotten what matters. Forgotten that growth without wisdom is decay. Forgotten that success without soul is collapse. Forgotten that knowledge, when divorced from ethics, becomes machinery without meaning. But memory deep, collective memory can restore alignment. And maybe that's why the records are stirring now. Not just in mystics and monks, but in everyday people. Teachers, scientists, artists, children, people who wake up with visions, people who accidentally dream of other lives, people who remember songs, languages, skills, and wounds they never consciously learned. This is not madness. This is the Akashic field rebooting the collective brain. And our job is not to dismiss it, but to decode it. Because if even a fraction of what lies in that field becomes integrated into the present to our ethics, our systems, our choices, we do not just survive the crises of our age, we transcend them. We build from memory, not trauma, from blueprint, not guesswork, from the wisdom of what we once were and what we might still become. We began with a paradox that in a world overflowing with data, the most vital knowledge may still be hidden, but maybe it was never hidden. Maybe it was always there quietly embedded in the very structure of reality, waiting not to be found, but to be remembered. The Akashic Records, whether viewed as a metaphysical archive or a metaphor for conscious evolution, ask us a daring question. What if the universe doesn't just contain knowledge? What if it remembers? What if the cosmos itself is intelligent, not in the way we program machines, but in the way a forest knows how to heal, a star knows when to die, and your soul, deep down, knows what it came here to learn? And what if that intelligence is not just watching you, but becoming you? This isn't mysticism, it's participation. You are not a separate entity wandering through a chaotic universe. You are a node in a cosmic web, both sending and receiving, forgetting and remembering, fragmenting and reintegrating. Every time you choose awareness over reaction, the record updates. Every time you forgive, the field clears. Every time you live in alignment with compassion, with clarity, with courage, you help shift not only your path, but the trajectory of humanity itself. Because your Akashic story is not yours alone. It's woven into a larger manuscript, one that spans galaxies, one that includes not just your lifetimes, but the lifelines of species, cultures, ideas. So, when you sit in silence, when you ask the deep questions, when you meditate not to escape, but to connect, you become something extraordinary. A conscious author, a rewriter of legacy, a student of time, a steward of memory. And in that moment, the Akashic Records are no longer theory. They are real. Not because we prove them with instruments, but because they provoked something essential in us, the desire to live meaningfully. So what now? Now you walk with reverence. Now you listen, not just to podcasts or pundits, but to your own inner archive. Now you live as if every choice echoes, because it does. Now you write your pages not with fear, but with intention. Because this book, this record, is not being written by fate. It is being written by you, right now. And the pen is still in your hand. The stars remember, the earth remembers, and maybe so do you. Welcome to the story behind the story. Welcome to the Akashic Records.